every single one of us needs to be spending time cultivating our personal brand. And everyone has a personal proprietary brand because no one else has your soul. You and your experiences are truly what make you entirely unique from your competitors, from anyone who might even come into partnership with you. Well, great, now there's two of us to go and drive this business forward. But if we're neglecting our proprietary brand, man, we're neglecting probably one of our greatest assets in our business.
I am very excited for today's guest, Christene Marie. So Christene has a superpower in personal branding, and she's going to walk us through how to be authentic and make sure that our brand aligns with who we really are. So Christene has a book that she's getting ready to release called Knowing, and you can find her at ChristeneMarie.com. So without further ado, I'd love to welcome Christene Marie to the $1 Million Agency Podcast. Christene, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patric. I just was sharing with you. I'm so excited to be here. From the first conversation that we had, it was really instantaneous connection, and we both clearly value similar things. So I'm excited to be here with you. And I assume your audience values similar things as well, or else they wouldn't be here. So excited to be here with all of you.
Yeah, I think they're going to glom right to you right from the beginning. From our first conversation, you were just someone that was so easy to talk to, somebody that it's so clear that impact and value is a big part of who you are and the change that you want to see in the world.
Thank you. Yes. Don't even get me. Well, I guess you can't get me started, but man, it's funny. I remember I was thinking about this for the first time in a very long time when I was 18 years old. Someone asked me, they're like, who do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do? And the only thing that I could really say at the time was, I just want to make a difference. I didn't know how, but I've gotten a lot clearer on that. And that desire hasn't changed. So I appreciate you saying that because it's very true.
Absolutely. So let's find out a little bit more. I know a lot about you from our conversation and doing some research, but I want everybody else to hear your story and kind of understand who is Christene Marie, and like, how did you become this superpower that you are now?
Thank you. So I grew up in the DC, Maryland area. Grew up in a very wonderful family, very conservative. My dad actually is a third generation owner of a painting business. So our family business started in 1922, which is incredible to be standing on the shoulders of that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, so to say. But it was funny because that was never a big highlight of our family. So I'm one of six. I've got 5 siblings and a very tight-knit family, but I was very much so the kind of the recipient of watching the major ebbs and flows of our family's financial status, so to say. So growing up when it was just the 4 of us, I'm fourth. So me and my 3 older siblings, my dad, I remember he would wake us up early in the morning, be like, we're going to a little resort. And we would get in the car and drive to the resort for the next 3 days. And it was just so much fun. And there were constantly these surprise trips where we would spend days on end at the beach. And it was just very fun and very surprising when we would have just all these little getaways. And then when my 2 younger sisters were born, one day he did like a quick whirlwind. We're driving down to Disney today, and we drove to Disney and came back the next day. So there was a lot of kind of that spontaneity and surprise factor growing up. But then kind of right in my middle of high school years, we ran into some pretty big financial problems. And there was just kind of that with that spontaneity came a lack of real strong footing in terms of the security of having kind of that baseline and having really good processes in place for how to do business. And so watching that and just kind of growing up, I never knew what an entrepreneur was, but that was a reference point for owning your own business. And so when I was 12 years old, I actually started my first business, which was hosting a girls' camp at our house. And so I was getting my feet wet on the entrepreneurial journey and really, again, didn't have much of a category for it other than I knew that I loved to be the one kind of defining what we're doing and building the agenda and bringing in the income, let's say. But then also there was that flip side of watching my dad and frankly, my family, we lost our house at one point. We were able to recover it shortly thereafter, but watching the big ebbs and flows. And even at Christmas time, it's like, I hope there are presents. But then we'll, 2 months later, go on these wonderful trips. And so it was really this big kind of emotional whirlwind of just not really knowing what to expect. But there was always enough. So on the heels of that, I ended up actually getting married when I was 20. So I was very much so a girl bride. And I never went to college. And I just started working right out of high school, met this young man when I was a senior in high school, married him, and really started just working and kind of earning my way in the world to talk about experiential knowledge. And I started out working in our community in public schools and really investing in the youth there. And then after getting married shortly thereafter, when I was 21, my brother-in-law was killed by a drunk driver. And he and my sister at the time had a 3-week-old baby girl. And so she and her baby girl came and lived with us. And it was it was just so incredibly devastating. And it's one of those things that I actually think that most people don't know how to talk about it, so they don't. And then there's this massive gap of our lives that remain hidden because we don't know how to put sorrow and devastation into words. And that was really the first time that I started kind of hiding parts of myself away because I didn't know how to deal with the emotional pain of it all. And then over the subsequent years that followed with her living with us, I stopped working with the kids because I had a lot at home to take care of and a little baby niece to love on. And I actually started at that time when I was 20 to begin really listening to digital marketing podcasts and learning from the OGs. And gosh, this was 2013, I guess, when I started really paying attention to the podcasts that were out there and like what people were talking about, Amy Porterfield, Gary Vee, like just the people that were really doing the work and trying things out. So predicated on their experiments, a lot of people started doing. And so I started getting into the digital marketing where I got a Google Analytics and Google ad certification, and then just started learning by doing, worked with a couple different agencies. And then when I was 26, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and figured why would I give all my money away to build someone else's business to the government? Why would I be doing that? And so I started my own business at 26. And it's been quite a journey since then. And the reason why I actually brought up that story and that aspect about my sister is because when I turned to, well, actually 3 months after I started the business, my husband said he wasn't sure if he wanted to stay married anymore. And so that was another then piece in the closet of my hidden kind of pain that I was building out. And Patric, I didn't know how to process any of it. I really was building and curating and cultivating the part of my brain which holds the IQ, and the EQ was just completely lying dormant and actually dying and wasting away because I was so not in touch with it. And so around that time that my husband was questioning that, I started to get to know the Enneagram, which is a personality test. And I started just being curious about, well, who is everybody else? And I started using that test actually in our business, and it really made a big difference in the way that we used and incorporated that in the way that we were looking at our audiences and the brand itself. So what are the core motivations? And it's much more an emotionally driven personality test because it touches on the core motivation of the person. Why are they doing what they're doing? And then we would create the marketing campaigns that would elicit an emotional response. Harvard finds that 95% of our purchase decisions take place in our subconscious, which is where emotions live. And so for so long as I and any one of us kind of puts away our emotions, we're really actually not able to access that core part of us that allows for us to be able to know why we're making the decisions we're making in terms of purchases. But then also as marketers and as business owners, it really inhibits our ability to speak to our customers and also simultaneous come forward as a strong brand because we're lacking the emotional connection with our own brand, which ultimately at its root is our core self. And so there's something about the integration of the EQ and the IQ that allows for the whole person, the whole brain to really be activated in and our approach to business in and of itself. And in so doing over the last 3 years, so my husband officially left when I was 28 years old. So over the last 3 to 4 years, it was the very first time that I kind of unlocked the door of all of that pain that had just been lying dormant, kind of eroding parts of me. And I have changed completely as a result of actually doing the work to process that and come to know who am I? And I have built a whole framework around that process because it's completely transformed my life, and I've moved a lot of other people through it, and consequently their lives have been changed. And it's like awakening the whole person, and it doesn't just translate our personal lives, it translates into our business as well, because people want to do business with people. And so for so long as we're not able to know who we are, we're not able to show up effectively and thus be able to secure the emotional connection that drives conversions and ultimately our businesses.
It's kind of there's been a tremendous amount of learning, is what it sounds like. There's been a tremendous amount of learning that's come through this from all different angles in your life, right? From seeing how the business impacted your family, to losing your house, losing a loved one, losing, having your relationship come to an end. Uh,
Yeah.
Part of what I'm getting from this is you had all this stuff like stored away. And then
Mm,
as you grew and matured, you learned how to process this. And I'm sure there's people listening that haven't made that transition. And I would wonder what the message is that you would give to yourself. Maybe if you could go back to when you were 19 or 20 years old before a lot of these things happened, so that you could handle them in stride rather than like letting them, or as you described, erode a part of yourself.
what a good question. I first would craft out time to allow myself to be. If we think about the difference between being and doing, really allowing ourselves to be. I mean, I went to Chipotle last night after I flew in, before driving home, and I sat down and was eating, and I just looked up and everyone else is on their phones and no one's just sitting there. There's no more kind of quiet solace because we're always getting inputs either from our phones or even listening to music. And that's been something that's been really transformative for me. And it's really hard. Even just this past week, I realized I was like, man, I'm constantly getting inputs. I really need to just put away and just intentionally go for a walk with zero inputs. Because otherwise, if you think of it like a funnel, right? Our brain is constantly getting inputs and our filtration system gets clogged if we're effectively having too many inputs and not enough outputs and allowing the time to filter through all the inputs and thus be able to activate. So we find this all the time if we're you just had your mastermind and you do such a wonderful job of helping people actually turn that into tangible outputs. Otherwise, it's just information and it's just inputs. And so that's number one, really creating time and space to allow for the filtration system to work and do its job and process all of the inputs. Number two would be to really pay attention to how we're feeling. So there's kind of these different wisdom centers in us. So we've obviously got the intellectual wisdom center, our brain, our cognitive function, and then we've also got our bodies. Literally, you touch something and it's hot. That's another wisdom center alerting us of danger. And then there's another one in our stomach, in our gut, our emotional wisdom center. If we feel strange or something feels off, there's usually a really good reason for that. And we haven't put as much honor to that center as we have to the cognitive center. And we've actually kind of damned that. I used to always view emotions as weakness. I learned at a really young age that if I cried or acted out or alluded to a negative feeling, I would probably get punished for it. We're taught how we should think, how we should feel, how we should act, versus, well, perhaps that's the ideal. And this is also a reality of how I am feeling right now. And until we allow for that input to go through the filtration system, it gets clogged and that just stays. That emotion just stays. And so if you think of the emotion as a tunnel, you have to move through the emotion to get to the other side. And so I would say for kind of that second piece of advice, it would truly be to listen and pay attention to the emotion and know what it's telling you so that then you can decide what to do. It's not that it runs the day, but it's informing you of something. So just knowing how to tap into that, I think that those are two of the most important, learning how to be, to allow for our filtration system, and then allowing for our emotions to inform us of why we're sensing what we are, because it's probably for a good reason.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't grow as a business owner. We can't grow as a person until we address some of the things that are holding us back. And I think a lot of us, well, we'll look away.
Mm,
We'll keep ourselves busy. Some people go to drinking and drugs. Other people, it's like, let me constantly stay focused and busy, or I've got to always be productive. And we don't realize that this like constant chatter doesn't allow us to, as you say, have things go through the filter, because there's always noise. It's such
yeah.
a valuable part of our personal growth.
That's so good. I love that. And there is more talk on that these days about the noise. And that lends to the question of well, are we contributing to the noise with our outputs? Because frankly, our output hasn't really done the due justice to go through the proper filtration system. Like, does our output have depth? Because we've taken the time necessary to allow for the curation and kind of the if we think about the cultivation of something, it takes time, and it takes work and it takes energy to allow for that thing to cultivate. And I think that especially with the use of AI tools, I immediately could tell with a couple colleagues when they switched to having ChatGPT write for them because their cadence changed. It lacked the depth because ChatGPT doesn't know our story. Claude doesn't know our story. And so apart from us being able to lead with the why and the background, that's ultimately what differentiates us. It's our experience. It's our story. And so if we haven't done the work to know it, we're not going to be able to move forward in a way that ultimately elicits the depth of connection that's elicited as the result of it.
Yeah, this leads us right into your kind of like superpower that you have around personal branding, where it's like you've got to know yourself before you can build something based on it, right? So I know that you have some different frameworks around branding, and I know that it ties directly to this, and I'd love to just kind of give you the opportunity to make that transition into the branding part.
Love it. Yes. Well, people generally remember stories 22 times more than facts. And if you've done much research on the marketing front in terms of best practices, you've probably seen that because really it's true. People remember the fables and the allegories and they remember the anecdotal parts rather than the hard numbers because that's what stirs that emotional resonance that Harvard found drives our purchase decisions. With that aspect in tow, I am excited to talk about story because really that is the element that allows for that bond. And then we can move forward. Now we're kind of on the same page. Now we're holding hands, walking down this road together. And so with that understanding, I want to talk about the knowing process. So the knowing process constitutes first knowing our brand, knowing our audience, and then also knowing the marketing channels that are going to form that connection. And so when I was speaking at Traffic and Conversion a couple of years ago, we were talking about how to cut through the noise of a very egocentric world. And I used an example of what we did for Amazon a couple of years back, where Amazon had the opportunity to effectively tell a story about a big event that we were supporting them with, either through their mouthpiece or through the mouthpiece of their executives. And so we really advise them to do so with the latter. And at first blush, when you're looking at data, you see that Amazon at the time, it was AWS services. They had 7.5 million followers on LinkedIn, and their one executive in particular had 9,000. It's kind of like, well, of course you should go with the brand. But we really tested a theory I had and proved it in leaps and bounds. And what we found was we curated the story predicated on who she was, pulling in the emotional components. That's kind of part of this framework that I'll talk about here in just a minute. And what we found was that it generated 35 times her normal engagement. It far surpassed what Amazon or the AWS typically gets. It got 688,000 organic impressions, which is just unheard of on LinkedIn. And then our hashtag went trending. So it was really notable how taking this framework of really allowing the person to kind of come forward bare and say, hey, look, this is who I am. It really shone a spotlight on that is so much more effective than hiding behind the big conglomerate brand that most of the time, I mean, that's what it had been historically up until a couple of years ago when influencer marketers really came out. And I think that that's something that all of us can benefit from. The goal isn't to have this massive influencer brand unless that's part of your bottom line. But when we're looking at vanity metrics versus bottom line metrics, that's a core part of kind of in terms of setting the stage here. The goal isn't to gain like tons and tons of followers. The goal is to have people who are engaged because the engagement rate is really what ultimately drives the business versus just the followers. And again, those vanity metrics. It makes us feel good to have tons of followers. But at the end of the day, how engaged is my audience? What's my view rate? What's my like rate? How long are they watching the videos? Are they bouncing? Things like that. Those are all aspects that really help us better understand whether the content that we're producing is forming a semblance of a connection point rather than just gaining tons of followers. Because frankly, the followers, they don't know if they like you or not. And so I'm even encouraging folks to not be afraid of people unfollowing you. That's okay. That means that you're actually having a stronger brand because you're demarcating. A strong brand demarcates between lovers and haters. And you see this with these talk about conglomerate brands. They do serve as good examples at times, especially with what they're doing and how they're allocating their resources. We found that, and not we specifically, but in me looking at the research, Starbucks coffee is actually third on the list of best tasting coffee. McDonald's is number one. Dunkin' is number two. And yet Starbucks has built this affinity surrounding we're kind of a luxury brand. People violently love Starbucks over Dunkin'. It's so funny. My sister has that fight with her in-laws. And so it's really true. You know, people really go towards the brand that they have an emotional connection to. And so when I talked about the example of allocation of resources that these conglomerate brands give us, is that they're actually spending a lot of money on paying for the development of the personal brands for their executives. And so I say all of that to prove the point that, y'all, every single one of us needs to be spending time cultivating our personal brand. And everyone has a personal proprietary brand because no one else has your soul. You and your experiences are truly what make you entirely unique from your competitors, from anyone who might even come into partnership with you. Well, great. Now there's two of us to go and drive this business forward. But if we're neglecting our proprietary brand, man, we're neglecting probably one of our greatest assets in our business. And so all that to say, when it comes to the knowing framework on the brand side, so we talked first about knowing the brand, knowing the audience, and then knowing your data and knowing your marketing strategy. So looking at knowing the brand, there's 3 questions that I really encourage people to move through as they're doing this work to really know who they are. First, well, who was I? What are the core memories and experiences that I had in childhood that shape who am I today? And so an example of that, this is an exercise that I've moved people through both in speaking and also on podcasts, is identifying one of your first and earliest memories. What happened? And like even close your eyes and envision, where was I? Who was I with? What feelings did I have or not have? You know, because as an adult, we can look back and say, oh, I had this really potentially negative experience and I have zero emotion tied to it. That's very odd. You know what I mean? It probably means that maybe that experience has been so shoved down and we're so disassociated from it that perhaps there's some work that needs to be done to bring back the human component to that child that's you, that frankly is still stuck at that age. Because when we have something traumatic happen and we don't move through that tunnel, that's the emotional tunnel, we get stuck there at that age in terms of mental development. And so that's not all of our parts. That's just an aspect of who we are gets stuck then. So who was I? That's the first question, identifying a core memory. And then who am I? How does that core memory show up today to inform a mindset that I now have? So an example of this is when I was 3 years old, my knee was causing me a lot of pain and I was crying a lot and just grumpy and having bad attitude. And I got spanked. And then I mentioned earlier that a mindset that I had today is don't show negative emotions. So I would live as kind of this perfect, happy-go-lucky person because I associated being vulnerable with pain. And so now in terms of my ideal, so the third question is, well, who do I want to be? So now let adult Christine decide who I want to be rather than just acting in default behavior to child Christine going through that pain as a 3-year-old child. So now, well, who I want to be? Well, I want to have strong relationships that are emotionally connected. And frankly, I have to be able to present myself in every regard in order to have that. Therefore, I want to be vulnerable in relationships. And so now that's a whole story, but not just a whole story, it's also a core value of mine. I really care about emotional intelligence and bringing that into the business, and that informs how my employees interact with each other, how my employees interact with myself, how they show up at work. It also informs the clients that we work with. I just learned another valuable lesson today that it also informs the vendors we select. So this aspect of emotional intelligence, because of those series of events, now is a core value. So if I don't do the work to go back and really understand the why, I'm going to have a harder time articulating the meaning of the value itself. And once I actually tell people, hey, this is the core value of mine and this is why, well, gee whiz, they're probably going to be a lot more on my team in terms of embodying those values than just we care about emotional intelligence. It's like, okay, well, so does everybody else. My favorite value that a lot of brands tout is integrity. It's like, okay, I'm not going to work with someone who's not integrous. Everyone says that, but your why is what differentiates you. And what really allows for people to actually remember, it's the story behind that that will elicit a remembrance of sorts. So those are just three questions. And obviously you can go super deep in each vertical thereof, but there's a lot there to unpack. I'm still doing the work today. I started it 3.5 years ago when I first kind of developed this framework. And it's really fun, Patric. Each one of us is really, really special. And I think that we get so busy doing, we don't spend enough time being with who we were created to be in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the attractive character is like exposing the struggles that we had and not just like how the end of the journey, right?
Yes.
People aren't at the end of their journey, and they maybe if you want to help somebody overcome what you overcame, you have to share the struggles so that they can understand that you've been through it and you don't have to show up as a perfect person.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That is so good. And that's a hallmark of a good story is the struggle. That I love that. Yes. You think of Lord of the Rings, right? Like you're not just going to read to the end. You feel so emotionally connected with Frodo and Sam and the camaraderie that they share through the hard times. And I think that that's just such a beautiful example of what it actually does with our audience, with our customers. When we do open up, they feel emotionally compelled to us. Somebody just reached out to me yesterday uh, and he commented on now it was with a business opportunity. I'd met him 2 years ago and he finally had, it's finally time to do business. And he was like, by the way, I've been following you on LinkedIn and I really love what you're posting. And I bet you there are many other people that he could have thought of, but it's the sharing of my story along the way that elicited the recollection. And also now it's the right time to do business. So y'all get to posting your stories and sharing them, but first you got to know it.
The things that are going to connect with other people the most is when we're vulnerable. Those are
Mm,
kind of the hardest things to share is
yeah.
to, we have to open up the reason that this story is hard for us to share is because there's pain associated with it from the past. And we're like, hey, not only do you have to relive this, but you're going to have to like share the struggle with the world. And how would you coach somebody to kind of overcome this so that they could have that comfortability? What would you say to someone that's scared to do that?
Hmm. I really would encourage them. I wish I could remember the exact advice I was given in this regard. I was in a mastermind actually during the process of my husband leaving and the divorce, and it was just so painful. And I had a feeling that at some point it would be something that was, I mean, I knew it would be something pivotal in my life, but I just had this feeling like maybe there's redemption here, where I can share what I'm learning right now to help maybe save other marriages or maybe save my own or something like that. And so someone gave me the advice of effectively we don't talk about what's still raw and like kind of bleeding. Like we don't talk about our open oozing sores right now because there is something, well, that's no one wants to look at that. Like that's actually really ugly. And so that's the open wounds is where I'll go with my therapist, with those I really, really trust. And then after it's healed, to the extent that I feel like a harsh word's not going to just tear the wound back open, that's when it's like, okay, and there's a big difference between authenticity and vulnerability. And I think we can confuse the two. Vulnerability is usually that aspect of like, this is very raw and very tender. But authenticity is like, hey, this is me sharing something that maybe there has been a reasonable amount of distance. Um, I found that I have inappropriately used story in that way where actually I'm processing with somebody else by way of me sharing and that was never asked for and therefore it actually puts them in an uncomfortable position because I'm literally coming and sharing something I think I'm trying to elicit an emotional connection. That's my intention. But because I haven't processed it yet and because I haven't done the work, I'm actually kind of putting them in the shoes of what should be my therapist or my loved one or somebody who's kind of like opted in to engage at that level. And so that's been really important for me in my own emotional intelligence journey is at what point do I actually feel like I've done enough work to thus be able to share and talk about it, where I'm not sharing for the purpose of receiving something. I'm not actually sharing this in a codependent nature. I'm sharing, and I hope it serves.
Yeah, it kind of seems like as we go through these painful parts of our life, things start to transition, right? Where there's almost like, hey, there's still this wound here, but it doesn't really hurt as much. And you're almost grateful that you've
Mm.
had it because you start to realize the learning and the way that you've grown from it. And the wound becomes dull and it's like replaced with wisdom and
Yes.
gratitude. I think at that point is where it's like, now I have something to give from somebody who's going through this.
I love that, replacing the wound with wisdom. Patrick, you're dropping all these bombs today. I'm like, yes, I love that. That's so beautiful. Exactly. Man, I want to remember that because it really is, you're moving through to this place of wisdom. Now, my husband, it's still really painful. Like, I still can get emotional. Like, even this month, like this marks 3 years of being divorced, and it's been hard, and I'm doing so much better. And I am grateful to use that word, when I never thought I ever would be. So I think that that's a really important and incredibly necessary decision and distinction before moving into this emotional journey. Because it's hard, and you got to have people in your corner.
Yeah. When you witness this, when you witness somebody sharing this, and they're just the blend of the vulnerability and the authenticity is really attractive. It's like, wow, this person, I know you. It's like I see you now. And if you are creating eliciting that response from people, whether there's somebody that you want to be in business with or a friendship, it's attraction in whatever capacity is, it's shared in. So I think it's a really valuable part of the personal brand. And I think sometimes, like, we've all felt this. Well, we'll be at a party or we'll be at a networking event and we're having a conversation and we share something, and then somebody else shares something where it feels like a one up, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, I've had this, I did this, right? That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is telling how it is and not like positioning yourself on the top of the mountain where you like look like you're some kind of like amazing person.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I host knowing dinners in areas where I'm speaking or attending events, and I had that happen at one of them recently, and I thought I really carefully curated the group, and there was someone who was there where it was a little bit of a shame because that's what happened. Somebody would share, and she didn't necessarily one up them with her pain, but it was more so like advice giving in return. So there is an element of like, okay, when we share, what's our responsibility given what the other person has given us? Like, it's kind of, the vulnerability slash authenticity is kind of a gift. Like, I'm extending a part of myself by way of, I'm hoping that it'll be met with like that hug or handshake, so to say. And so I think, to your point, how are you receiving the authenticity and vulnerability of someone else? Like, that's a weight of responsibility. And so, do we even know ourselves well enough to be able to engage at that level? And I think that that's just a really important note in terms of, what does my role in relationship look like? Because there is a big difference. How am I presenting myself? How am I showing up? And then, I mean, frankly, that kind of lends to the next point of knowing your audience. How do you interact with them and receive this kind of precious data of knowing their emotional pain points? And how are you interacting with it and engaging with it so that they feel seen as a result? And Chris Voss, actually, I was just at an event where he was speaking. He's really, really wonderful, incorporating empathy. And he does it in a very tactical way, where I actually would disagree with him a little bit. So he talks a lot about asking questions and really drawing people out, and being able to mirror back to them. And he talks about these different concepts of mirroring, labeling, which effectively ensures that we're really hearing the person, which I absolutely love. But he never talks about us ever sharing our end. And so there is kind of this give and take. It's playing tennis, so to say, where as a brand, I'm not just pulling forth all of the emotional pains from my audience and then positioning my service in a way that sells to them to meet their needs, but I'm really being open and honest in return. And that empathy is us sitting in their shoes, but then also leading with our own authenticity and vulnerability. And then that's where if you think about a bridge analogy, the audience on the other end, the empathy pulls them forward, but then the authenticity moves you towards them already so that it's not manipulation. Using empathy as manipulation is dangerous. And a lot of people do that. So it's being able to share our own experience, which lends to it being a little bit more equilibrium in the relationship.
I think it's really powerful to kind of make that distinction there. So I want to change gears a little bit. I know that you have all this amazing knowledge on branding, and we've talked about kind of knowing who we are so that we
Yeah.
have the ability to be authentic. And we've talked about how we can deliver some of this stuff to our audience so that we can expose who we are and why we do what we do. So just changing gears a little bit, what are some of the mistakes that you see, particularly agencies make when they're trying to set up their branding, their personal branding to tell their story?
Hmm. I think that what I've seen is that there's a fear of and concern over having a person be the face of it, which I understand, right? There's a big difference between the individual's profile versus the company's profile. Um, what I would really encourage agencies to do when cultivating their brand is think about, well, what's your vision? What do you want? Do you want to exit? Like, is this an agency for exit? Is this an agency to hand down to your children? Is this a legacy organization? What is the intent and purpose of this agency? And you'd be surprised, or actually, maybe you wouldn't. This is your bread and butter, so you probably wouldn't be surprised how many people don't think about the end goal. And so it extends beyond agencies. It's most entrepreneurs don't think about what is the overall intent with this company, unless obviously you're a massive size. Then hopefully you've done your due diligence and you know that you're setting yourself up for exit. But that question is incredibly important for mid to small sized organizations. I mean, even a $40 million home services brand that we were working with, we helped them move through towards acquisition. But I got to tell you, Patrick, we were still using people as representatives of the brand. And then we did incorporate some other mascots, so to say. We used some local sports celebrities in it to represent the brand, but it was only ones that we knew held similar values to us, ones who promised long-term partnership, ones who had a brand that kind of mirrored what we would want to represent. And then also we still do position the founder even still, because he didn't completely exit the company itself. He now just, has a capital investor. And so he's still involved. So the personal aspect of the brand is incredibly important. And it doesn't have to be a person per se. You think of Geico, the gecko, representing it, but there needs to be something that is incredibly consistent with every single bit of the creative to allow for the differentiation and being able to see it that, oh, I know who this is. I know this brand. And so that's the element that I think a lot of internal agencies are missing. The second element is that we actually don't pay enough attention to ourselves. We do everything for our clients. And so what would it look like to truly invest in us as a company and in our brand? I would start with doing a real hard analysis of the state of things. I actually did that just the other day in preparation for a training. So I have a bot that I've trained on me and my socials, but what I had it do was just do a self-audit of me. So it knows me decently well now, but I put in all of my social content there, and I asked it to spit back out to me, what are my values? What's my vision? What are my services? And then it gave me a full rundown, and it was really, really helpful to get it back. And I was like, sweet, I'm talking about that which I care about. And frankly, it gave me some good feedback. They were like, you could probably talk more about your services. So I sometimes focus too much on the EQ in my social content, not enough on the IQ and what we're actually delivering. But run a self-audit through GPT, whichever of you're choosing, because they'll give you the most objective feedback. And then also ask your customers. That's another aspect. So that would be number 3. We actually don't talk enough to our customers and ask them to do, just give us feedback. How can we be better? How can we better serve you? Is there an element that frankly you really love about what we're doing? And then the fourth thing I would say in the branding aspect is to go back and do kind of a campaign, a resurrection campaign. There's probably a lot of people that have been served over the years, that received proposals over the years, that we could probably dig back into the trenches and resurface and just kind of reintroduce ourselves. And this is a great opportunity to really, in terms of building out the copy, who are we? What are our values? And does our content, do our email campaign, socials really align with that? And then doing a very intentional campaign in regards to the resurrection aspect of those people. We already have their email addresses. They're not currently engaged. Let's go after them, because the bottom of funnel, the people that we worked with years ago or who we sent the proposal to, usually we never touch again. And they're probably much warmer leads than who we're paying for in terms of the cold inbound traffic.
This is fantastic advice. You kind of hit on something. One last final question to wrap this up is, how are you using, aside from what you just mentioned, how are you using AI and these tools as a part of your personal branding strategy? And how can somebody that's getting started with their personal brand that maybe doesn't have the resources, how can they leverage some of this technology to get more bang for their buck?
I would first start with come up with so you can use a DPT for most all of this if you have the right inputs, right? So some of the inputs I would give are effectively, the first would be to really truly articulate your values if somebody doesn't have the resources and they haven't done this work. So working with the ChatGPT just to think through, okay, these are the things, and do move through that framework of, okay, these are find 3 core memories. How do they show up as 3 core mindsets? And do those potentially even translate into a couple of values for you? So I would do that first. And then I'd go into ChatGPT and say, here are 3, add in a couple more values of mine. I want to turn these into statements that allow for my audience to feel an emotional resonance for me. Here are the stories associated with each one of these values. So give ChatGPT the background about it. And then what I would do is actually so run through the values piece. And then what's your vision? So what do you want to accomplish? What's the emotional transformation? You want to move your audience from emotionally feeling this way to emotionally feeling that way. So feed it that as well. So values, vision, the emotional transformation, and then include your services. And then from there, what I would do, and I actually just was learning about this past weekend, it was so fire. So I'll give full attribution to Laurel Portier and Nick Peterson. It was really fantastic. They were talking about just 4 different ways in which people consume information. The analytical, where they need data, research, hard numbers. The aspirational, the story, what's kind of the transformation piece that I was just talking about. The anthropological, so going deep on the person. And then the other one, I'll tell you later. It'll be in the show notes. But I actually ran that framework through ChatGPT the other day, and I said, these are the 4 frameworks. Now, would you take these stories? So give ChatGPT the stories, and would you help me create content for each one of these pieces? And so what it did was it actually took this one general concept of, actionable. Yay, I just remembered. All right, so that's the 4th: aspirational, analytical, anthropological, actionable. So those are the 4 categories of the type of content to produce. And so I took a general kind of story around like working with Amazon. And so I said, hey, here's the story. That's kind of the analytical. So that's a data driven. This is what we did. This is what was the outcome. And then I asked it to turn it into the other 3 story types. And it created this incredible output where it gave the aspirational, the anthropological, and then also the I keep forgetting every time, anthropological. I can't remember. I'm gonna keep going and just smooth right on past that.
Yeah, we'll chop.
We'll outline it. So
Yeah.
I asked it to create, and I said, this is amazing. Don't forget it. And then I saw the little thing, memory updated in ChatGPT. So I said, moving forward, I want my one social post to be created in 4 formats. And so what that does is that allows for, one, being able to historically go back into your socials, put that piece of content into ChatGPT that you've already created the framework, right? And said, hey, can you create this as more actionable? Because again, if I'm staying a little bit more existential, I'm not getting as practical in my application, in my posts. And so now I've got the whole wealth of opportunity to repurpose content. So y'all start with repurposing content. If you've been posting and you have a bit of a cadence of social, even if it's one time per week or per month, that's fine. So do the audit that I mentioned before going in and teaching it your values, your vision, your services, and the emotional transformation. Do the audit, do the input of those four, give it the framework of those four types of stories, and then start feeding it your old data and see what it comes up with.
Yeah, fantastic advice. I love it. It's an easy way to get started where it's going to create amazing stuff that's unique to you. So, Christine, this has been fantastic. Do you have any final words on that you want to leave the audience with? And second question, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Yes. Final words, man, apart from knowing ourselves, empathy is manipulation. So we have to do the work to know ourselves in order to allow for that connection that we make with our audience to really be genuine and produce loyal customers. And the last piece, which you asked, ChristeneMarie.com, and you can see my spelling, CHRISTENE. I'm not Christine, I'm Christine. ChristeneMarie.com. Thank you, Patric.
Fantastic. This is awesome, Christine. Thank you so much. Amazing guest with tons of great shares in here and a lot of opportunities for personal growth for somebody that's willing to kind of run with some of the self work.
I am so grateful. I'm grateful that you're willing to have this type of conversation. You know, so many times we just focus on the IQ and neglect 50% of who we are. So I'm grateful for the integration of the whole and so appreciate you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the iceberg's under the water, and that's the subconscious, right? So if we just ignore that, you're ignoring the greatest, the low hanging fruit, the greatest opportunity to really grow. And with that personal growth, it not only is going to impact your life, but your entire business too.
Yes, absolutely. And talk about marriage, kids,
Yeah.
not having regrets at 80, 90 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Christine. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Patrick. Have a wonderful day.
You too.